Alright, it is time to record my film reveal video. This is where I take a look at my film for the first time from my Zion winter fall trip. And I don't quite know what to expect from this one. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I haven't worked in an active snow before, so I don't really have the best feeling as far as metering and also sort of the light that I was working with. So I exposed, I think it's 20 something sheets of slide film, and also just a couple sheets of color negative film. So we'll see how it goes. And also the film, it's in protective sleeve so I can handle it with my paws here without getting any fingerprints all over it. So let's take a look at what we got. All right, so this is the scene that I was actually most curious about. This is from the morning when I had the entire end of Zion Canyon all to myself because I was there before they closed off the gate. This is interesting. There's a little bit of a magenta cast. Now, what was happening at the time when I shot this, it was right at sunrise, and there were some small clouds that were being lit up by the sun, and they were casting some really warm light down in the scene, because initially I was actually concerned about this being too cold as far as strong blue cast on the snow. But in this case, those clouds up top really gave me a sense of warmth. And I'm actually a little warmer than I'd like, but I can certainly dial down the magenta cast. Exposure is pretty darn good. I'm a little bright right here, but to my eye, that was pure white for the most part. And so I think I'll have all the detail that I need. Now, what's interesting about this composition is that there's a sandstone feature right here that goes over a little ways here. And initially I was thinking a horizontal composition, but this was creeping into view, and I think it'd be a little bit of a distraction as a horizontal because it didn't really stand out enough in the background. So I went vertical. This right here is creeping into the shot a little bit, but I knew I could always crop that out. But this is pretty cool. Also worth mentioning, there's a big, it's dry waterfall right now, but there's a big waterfall back there. So it actually would have been pretty awesome to catch a snowfall along with a waterfall in the background, but I don't know if that would necessarily coincide. Let's see how we do with sharpness. Oh yeah, that is very sharp. And I have good detail in the snow where I need it. And then all the plants in the foreground just weighed down with this, it was like this sloppy snow that came out in these big chunks and just coated everything. That is a photo I'm very, very happy with. I'll need to scan it. I'll need to take down the magenta cast, but my exposure is good. So I'm happy about that. This is on Fuji Velvia 50. And I also have this on Provia. And I think I have another sheet of Velvia as well. I think I shot it before the light was at its peak. Okay, so now this is actually interesting. So this is before the really warm light. There's still some warm light there, but if you look at these exposures, pretty sure I have a little more detail right there on this one. You know, it's hard to say. I do actually have decent detail there. So yeah, I have a little better exposure here. So I don't know which of these I shot first, but I'm glad I have two different variations with a slightly different exposure. This one's a hair more magenta. And I have good detail in the trunk here too. For this scene, the way I metered it is I just had my Last-A-Light pop-up gray card and just held it out and then spot metered off that and then metered off the scene because I was in the same general light as the scene. But I'm really happy to see that. It was such an amazing morning in Zion. All right, so this is my experimental shot. This is one where it was snowing in a slot canyon, and I just didn't, I was curious how this would look on film. And I knew that I'd be blowing out highlights back there. It's fine, it's snow. But I was more so curious about the atmospherics in terms of the snow creating a little bit more of a fog. And I didn't have any ND filters with me, but if I did have ND filters, it would have been really interesting to throw an ND on there and just to have it where you have even more snow. Because there's actually some streaking here from the snow as it was falling. Because it was a pretty good snow. So, purely a experimental shot. Exposure is actually quite good on the snow. Depth of field's a little weird. This is my 240 lens. So I don't know that I'll ever use this for anything, but it was just something that struck me as I was there that, you know, this might be an interesting opportunity. This is on Provia. And tricky exposure, but not bad. I don't think I'll use it for anything, but always a good experiment. All right, so this is the first scene that I shot. And so you can see what a difference the light makes. And also you can see how strong the magenta cast is. But here's the same scene, and then here's this rock formation off to the side. And I use the same lens to photograph. I use my 450 lens. And this is the day before. And it had been snowing at the higher elevations, and then just a little bit of a snow started to fall down in the main canyon. And when I showed up at the scene, it looked way better than this. There was an active snow falling. There were some strong atmospherics. This formation was separated greatly from the background. There was even more snow on the trees. And it looked so amazing on the ground glass. But by the time I had the camera ready to shoot, put the film holder in, the snow just stopped like that. The sun started coming out. There was a little bit of clouds drifting around, so I was able to expose a single sheet. And it's decent, but compared to what it was, I'm a little bummed out I wasn't able to capture what it was before. But in terms of exposure, I mean, it's decent. It's Provia, so it's a little bland looking. That's just the way it is. You can actually see there's still a tiny bit of snow falling. I see some streaks there, which is kind of nice. I don't know. I'll have to scan it. My exposure is good. My exposure is very good. I feel like this needs to be cooled down a little bit. It's a little too neutral. Maybe cool it down a little bit. But we shall see. Again, I'm a little bummed I didn't get the photo just a few minutes before this, but the scene was rapidly changing. But I'm happy to see that at least I got something there. So this is a little dark. This is another scene that was rapidly changing. I like this little bush here that was backed up by the snow. I'm a little underexposed here, though I do have texture in the snow. So in that sense, it's a decent exposure, but I'm getting a little dark in some of the dark red areas of the sandstone. And what's happening is the snow was starting to melt as I was shooting this. Initially, there's a little more snow in here. It's okay. I might have a brighter exposure of this one. I like the concept of it. I like the diagonals. I like the little plant right there. But I'm a little dark on the exposure. So maybe if I get a little brighter exposure, that'll be better. And then, okay, now this is interesting. So this is my Provia shot from that morning. And I think this is the first sheet of film I exposed, because I went with Provia because it handles the longer exposures pretty well. And I'm actually fairly neutral. This is before the sky was lighting up really warm. And I kind of dig this one. It'll be interesting to scan this compared to the Velvia and see which one scans better. This one looks a bit more realistic. Let's check the exposure. So I'm curious about is this area here, and then these areas here, and that area over there. So let's see the brightest area. Yeah, I probably have enough. With a good drum scan, I probably have enough to work with. Because it needs to be white anyways when it's printed. So it's actually a pretty good exposure. So this will be very interesting to see this compared to the Velvia. Let me pull that Velvia shot out. So we're going to see a big difference in color here because the light was also different between the two of them. This is pretty much what it looked like early on, but once that really warm light started hitting, it did get very warm. But I think the main thing will be see how it scans and see how it looks in the bright areas. The dark areas aren't a problem. I have a feeling the Velvia might be better if I just tone it down a little bit, but we'll see. But I'm really glad that my exposure was quite good there, because that was quite possibly a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Not only to have the subject like this, but to end up being at a point where I drove in there very, very early, and then they closed the gate after me, so I had the whole place to myself. And it was not very common that one has that opportunity. All right, so this one, let me just close this little flap here so it's better protected. All right, so this is my Velvia shot. And this is the ice with the frozen cottonwood leaves. It was just a brown puddle the day before, and then it froze nicely overnight. There's some interesting textures here. I did like the diagonal emphasis of that. I picked out this leaf as one of my favorites. They're all embedded in the ice, but as far as just a lighter one standing out from the others. Looks to be quite sharp. That is very sharp. This is very, very, very fun to look at. Now I shot this on both Velvia and Provia. So I'll have multiple options. But that is quite nice. Exposure is very good. Composition works well. So I'll be looking forward to seeing the Provia version of that as well. So Provia and Velvia, the same scene. Then here's another variation of that. And I shot, what's interesting is I shot two different windows of light. One when I first had the opportunity, and then another one as there was just a little more reflected light on the scene. Honestly, I don't see a huge difference. This one has a little less blues in the ice. So if you compare that area to that area, it's a little less blue. So this might be the reflected light one. This might be before. Either way, there's gonna be something there that's gonna work quite well. Man, these are so fun to shoot in large format. Another thing too, whenever I shoot small scenes like this, I pretty much always end up with some sort of like dead bugs in the scene. So you never notice it until you get a drum scan, and then you look at it and you just count all the dead bugs in the scene. But that is very cool. So happy to see that. And so this is the first scene I photographed. This is in the first snowfall that was only at the higher elevations. And there was just this light dustiness snow that was sticking to some of the remaining fall color. I shot this scene on Velvia, which is what this is. A little notch right there shows you it's Velvia. I also shot it on Provia, and I also shot it on color negative film because I was a little concerned about the darkness of that and also being able to maintain some detail in the snow there. And it looks like the exposure is pretty decent. It's a hair dark, but if it was any brighter, I'd probably be blowing out those areas there. So I have good texture in the snow. Good fall color. Focus could be a little tricky on this. I have basically this area's in focus, this area's in focus, this area's in focus. Not this, not a big deal. And not the branches, you really can't get both. But for me, it's all about just the snow sticking to those leaves. And that is quite pretty. Almost black and white, if not for the cool leaves there. Compositionally, I just was working with all these branches because they provide these other elements that move you through the scene. And this is with my 450 lens, moderately long lens, equivalent to about a 60 millimeter on a full frame. So, cool. All right, next up. So this is that exact same scene, but I just pan the camera over to the right a little bit more, because on this one, you have all the branches arcing into the scene. And same thing with the exposure. It's a little tricky from the standpoint that I didn't want to blow the highlights. I didn't want to block up the shadows. It looks like I hit a pretty good balance there. I don't really like this corner up here, but that's something I was aware of when I was composing it, thinking maybe I'd just crop in a little bit if need be. It's a little bit of a blank corner up there. It's very sharp. It's actually interesting, there's some, no, those are actually just the seeds. I was thinking there's some pine needles that had been blown into the leaves, but that's just from the maple seeds hanging there. Good exposure. Again, I was just spot metering off a gray card and worked quite well. Interesting. There could be like a square potential in here too, but I may have to just crop out that corner. I guess I could also, yeah, there's no real getting around that. Interesting to see. Look forward to seeing the Provia versions of those. Speaking of Provia, here is the Provia version of the Leaves in the Ice. So it's more subdued color, a little less contrast. Let's see if I can dig out the Velvia version for you. All right, so for those of you that are curious about Velvia versus Provia, here is the Provia, here is the Velvia. And looking at these two now, that blue is a little excessive. This is a bit more accurate. Though honestly, somewhere between the two would be pretty good. Because Provia gets a little bit of a cyan cast. Velvia is not only more saturated, more contrast, it goes a little magenta. I actually wouldn't be surprised if the Provia might be the better scan, because I have a little less contrast. Let's see how we do for sharpness. It shouldn't be any different than the others. Yeah, that is tack sharp. All the little bubbles in the ice. It was funny when I was, after shooting this scene, I took a picture of my camera and then it showed me pointing at this puddle here. And you can't tell in the Instagram photo, but it looks like just I'm aiming my camera at a little pile of trash on the ground. But in that pile of trash, we have these wonderful leaves and some ice patterns. It was a frosty morning. And just after shooting this, I broke my Arca Swiss Cube geared head, which I just sent in for repair yesterday. Always carry a backup. Because if I didn't have that backup tripod head, I wouldn't have been able to shoot the first photo I showed in this film reveal, which is the snow-covered tree, because I wouldn't have had a tripod head. Can't shoot an 8x10 without a tripod head. Again, very good. And I would not be surprised if this is the one I end up scanning in terms of Provia versus Velvia on the scene. Because this is more realistic. You still get those cool tones, but we'll see. It was so cool to find that puddle the day before it froze and see what it looked like, and then return to it the next day. All right, so here's Provia of that scene with the tree. And again, I think I'm digging the Provia version over the Velvia. We have a little less contrast. We got a little better detail in the shadow tone there. And highlights are still looking really good. So for ice and for snow, seems like Provia does pretty well. These are things I was not super sure of when I was in the field. But if I reduce a little bit of cyan cast on this, I think I'll actually have a good scan to work with. It's just that corner there, which is a little annoying. It was so cool to see the vibrant color there during the winter. What have we got here? So here is Provia, and that same scene, just centered on the tree. And this one, the composition as it stands works fine. Got all these lines working through, tying it together. Again, these trunks are not going to be in focus, but it's no big deal because this photo is all about these snow-covered leaves, bits of fall color. This is also interesting. When I was in Zion, near the end of the trip, on my fall trip, I should say, I photographed the scene with my A7R4 with these cool looking maples and then rocks below it and stuff. This is that exact same tree. And I've shot this same tree other times as well. And it just changes so much. I could show you all these photos side by side. You never know they're the same tree. It's very sharp. And for me, at least, that's the reason why I love going back to a location, because you see these changes in the subjects over time. And it was really cool seeing that tree covered in fresh dusting of snow. So here's a Provia version of the slick rock with the snow on it. This is one where Provia does not do super well. It just kind of goes blah. But also, I mean, the Velvia version wasn't particularly amazing either. A footprint right there. I don't know, I'll have to scan it. It had an interesting look to it when I was there, but I don't know that I'm particularly in love with it. But exposure is quite good. Have some really good texture on the snow. No blown highlights, no shadows messed up. By messed up, I mean too dark. So I don't know, maybe scanning this one and then trying to fix the cyan cast a little bit. It would certainly do better, I believe, than the Velvia version of this scene. All right. Okay, so this scene, this is interesting. This is on the first snow. I think it's the third day, no, fourth. No, this is the second snow. There's like 3 different snowfalls that happen. But I was walking through the wash and I found this snapped off maple tree just laying there on top of another maple tree. It was laying in the nice clean snow, nice snow on there. It just had some order to the chaos. I love the contrast of the snow on there against the darker limbs of it. And it just basically started with the snow. It didn't go from rain to snow. So all the branches and stuff, they're not super dark and waterlogged. And then also you get some really nice snow on the remaining fall color there. I believe with my spot meter, I think the snow right here was about positive 2.4. And same thing, I spot metered a gray card and then set that as, put it in memory, set as the average, look through the scene, and it looked like it was giving me good values. And I'd say I did quite well on the exposure. And it was actively snowing when I shot this. Focus is good. It's actually a really good exposure. I had all these concerns that my photos would be way too bright or way too dark. I like that. One of the concerns I had was the top of this right here, because this is the trunk for that tree. I wanted to show a little more of that, but also the business end was down here, and I didn't want to start chopping this off too much. So I might crop just a little bit off the top so I don't have that little point going up against the top there. And I actually wouldn't mind cropping a little off the bottom as well to reduce the conflict of these branches so close to the edge. But this mild crop of this, I think, would help. I should have this on Provia as well. So we'll see how that does. And here is the Provia. And so because it's Provia, we have a little less contrast. So our shadow tone is a little bit better. You don't worry about things being too dark. I feel like I'm almost a little too bright right there. But I don't know. It might actually be okay. I'll have to see how it scans. This is really borderline with regard to the exposure. So it could be that the Velvia does a little bit better, but I love the lighter tones through here as far as the actual branches itself. But it'll be good to have the options of both the Velvia and Provia. What I'm learning to, I really do like Provia in a lot of situations. This one didn't turn out so great. So after shooting the very, very first photo I showed you with the large cottonwood tree covered in snow and all this stuff in the background, see, when I shot that, there were some clouds that had lit up really nicely, and then they cleared away, then it was just blue sky. And since I had the whole end of the place to myself, I was trying to find some other things to point my camera at. So I found this scene, figured a long lens, showing the desert, varnish, some snow there. This is Velvia. First I thought this would be Provia, but this is Velvia. The light is just not great here. I'm overexposed. Yeah. I'm definitely a bit overexposed. But just the light isn't great. It's a very cold light because this is just nothing but blue sky lighting this. This is in the shadow. The sun was starting to creep down this face here. I thought Velvia would be a little warmer with this, but it was a really blue light. I remember taking some pictures with my iPhone, and it was definitely a very cold light by then. So even though I'm a little bright on the exposure, I'm losing some detail in there. I just don't think the light was all that great there to begin with. I think I only shot a single sheet of that. And this photo is along the same lines. This is just aiming the camera downward a little bit more. And I didn't have an amazing feeling for this scene. It was more so me just trying to find something to point my camera at while I was there. Because I knew that that first photo would be a good one. But also, I am quite bright on the exposure. Blown some highlights in the snow back there. But it's no big loss. Because the light just wasn't great. You gotta have good light. So, I did kind of like the composition and stuff, but you know, if you don't have good light, you don't have good light. All right, next up. Okay, so I did shoot a second variation of that scene. Now this one actually has a better exposure. Because looking at this, some of my dark tones are starting to get a little close to being too dark, especially in here. You know, if I needed to have a print of this scene, this one actually is okay. But I think it's just asking too much from slide film. My exposure is actually fine on this one. Let's do a little comparison. It is this one. So these are both Velvia, and yeah, maybe kind of hard to see. But this one is a little bit brighter than this one. This one has a little bit better detail, but it's still not amazing. Just because the light's not great. It'll be worth a scan to see, but maybe scan it, warm it up a little bit, see if I can get some of the actual warmth from that sandstone. I've always loved that sandstone wall. I've always tried to find some way to photograph it. But I just don't know that that's the best way. And then here's the other scene on Provia. Again, my exposure is a bit bright. Yeah, it's blown out. But the light just isn't all that amazing. Yeah, even as a panorama, I'm still blowing that up. But it was such a beautiful thing. I mean, after I shot these photos that morning, I grabbed my digital, I walked around and shot some long lens digital stuff. And at a certain point, I didn't even feel like shooting any more photos. It was just, I wanted to experience walking around and seeing the beautiful sights. And again, I'm really happy that that first one turned out. All right, color negative film. So this is the stuff that will be hard to see exactly what it is we're looking at. So this is the maple covered in snow. There's the branches there, the leaves with the snow on it. And I think this slide film would be plenty for this. But I should scan that just to see how that does. I probably should have shot a little more color neg, but, and this is the experimental shot with the slot canyon, the snow, the bright areas up there, and it'll be interesting to scan this, but again, I'm not expecting anything great from it. And I did one of the things you're not supposed to do. I'd use some front tilt in this slot canyon to make sure I got these as well as that, and focus at the expense of some of the walls here aren't going to be in focus. But overall, I'm actually pretty happy with what I see. Really happy about that first photo, and then I'll have to scan some of the snow-covered maples and see how those do, and the ice. The ice was cool as well. So my goal is to get maybe a couple shots from this trip, and we'll see how that goes. Now, as far as the timeline of everything, I've been back from this trip for a week now, and while I was on the trip, I learned that they were opening up the campgrounds in Death Valley again. So that was actually one of the reasons I went to Zion in the first place, because I couldn't go to Death Valley. But now Death Valley is on the table. And so now that I know that I got some decent stuff from this trip, within about a week or so, I'm gonna head out to Death Valley, and I've got some subjects in mind there. So I'm really looking forward to having this extended stay in Zion for the snow, then head to Death Valley and see what I can find there. But I'm gonna scan these in, see how they look, and then start packing my bags for heading to Death Valley. But I do wanna thank everyone for watching, and I'll see you around next time. If you enjoy this ad-free and clickbait-free content and wanna help me live my dream, a voluntary contribution of just $24 a year helps keep my gas tank full and my film freezer stocked. For more information on how to support me and my work, please visit the donation section of my website at benhorn.com/donate. I also have prints and my portfolio box set available on my website. You can find a direct link down below in the show notes. Thanks in advance for your support.